Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Azure Infrastructure Update. It is the 29th of May and this is the build special. So we just had Microsoft build. So there's a huge number of announcements because even though it's developer focused, there's still a lot of things that impact us here in the infrastructure space. So I'm going to go over all of those things that touch infrastructure in some way. As always, a like and subscribe is appreciated. I have the chapters down in the description and the bottom of the video, obviously because there's so many this week. I've really just broken it down by the big functional areas rather than every particular update. There's just so many. New videos this week. So I released an SC100 study Cram. So that's going to get you the cybersecurity expert certification when combined with one of the AZ500 or the SC200 or 300. There's a few others you can use, but it's this plus one of the others gets you the new cybersecurity expert certification. It's currently in beta, so I sat it to see what it's like and created its maybe hour and a half, 2 hour video to help you think about the key things. And I did have the 125,000 ask me anything. I asked for the questions on LinkedIn and Twitter and YouTube. And so I took the ones that I thought would be the most interesting and answered them in that video. So there you go. So let's get to it. On the compute side, so the DCV3 series has gone GA. So this is part of the confidential compute. There's different levels of that confidential compute. For example, there's the AMD-based ones that encrypt the entire virtual machine. And then the DC is using the Intel SGX. Now, these use enclaves because we have these software guard extensions that I write my application to leverage. So the application's memory, its CPU is always encrypted. The benefit that gives above the whole VM encryption is now even other processes in the same OS instance can't see the memory of that application that's using the Intel SGX. So those are now GA, but you do have to modify the app to use that enclave. The EBS v5 SKUs are now available in 13 new regions. So the big deal about this EB, that variant, is it's really focused on additional storage IOPS and storage throughput. If I think about my databases, maybe that need really high disk communications throughput IOPS, the EBs allow me to have that. So it's up to 120,000 IOPS, up to 4,000 megabytes per second for what are smaller amounts of CPUs and memory. AKS dynamic IP allocation has gone GA. So before this dynamic allocation, what we would have is for every node, it would pre-allocate a certain number of IPs from the subnet. By default, it was 30 based on the number of pods it was going to support. So it would claim all of the IP addresses up front. What this does is with the Azure CNI, it will now only allocate the IP when it's needed by a pod. This means essentially fewer IPs are required initially. Also with this, I can now use a separate subnet for the pods than what the nodes are using. This would mean from, for example, a traffic permissions, I could have different rules affecting the nodes that affect the actual pods. And I can have different node pools using different subnets in the same virtual network. So again, that helps me have a larger IP space by having different node pools using their own subnet. But I can, if I want, have multiple clusters, multiple node pools sharing a subnet if that's better for me. There's now custom AKS node configurations. So I can think about there are certain dials I can turn both on Kubernetes and both on the underlying operating system itself. So things like the CPU quotas, process IDs in a pod, file and networking features of the operating system, I can now tweak these through this new set of capabilities. This will be useful maybe for performance optimizations. The CIS benchmark for AKS Linux nodes has gone GA. So this is the whole Center for Internet Security. And when I think about a Linux node, it's using Ubuntu. Now, AKS does not let you pick the operating system. It uses Ubuntu, It provides an optimized, from a security perspective, operating system specifically for AKS. It's automatically patched. It disables certain things that we don't need in that AKS environment. So now what's happening is the security configuration is using that Azure Linux security baseline, aligning with the CIS benchmark. So now I can attest to the state of those Linux-based nodes being used by AKS, that it has that CIS compliance. AKS minor version alias has gone GA. If I think about versioning in AKS, you have the major.minor.patch. And what we previously had to do was always specify the full 3 components of that. I'd say, hey, 1.21.7. Well, now with the minor version aliases, I could just say, hey, I want 1.21. And it will automatically then go and pick the latest patch version based on that minor version I've specified. So, hey, I say 1.21. If the latest patch is 0.7, it will automatically go and use 1.21.7. ARM64 agent nodes can now be used in AKS for a node pool. There's a big investment in ARM64. When I think about cost and optimization based on CPU, ARM64 is very cost effective. So what I can now have is actually ARM64 Ubuntu agent nodes as part of my AKS. This is based on the Ampere Ultra ARM. And it's just, hey, a new cost optimized model compared to the more traditional x86. AKS cluster extensions have gone GA. So AKS extensions are deployed via ARM. They add certain functionality to my AKS environment. And the fact that it's deployed via ARM control plane means it's really good for larger scale management. Now, right now, these cluster extensions are focused on Dapper, Azure ML, and GetOps. So I can think about, well, the Dapper is that distributed application runtime. It's really a set of APIs that make it really easy for me to write microservices running on Kubernetes. Really good, for example, for communication between different services, opening up endpoints, a whole bunch of functionality that makes it easier for me to write those. Think about the Azure ML. Now I can use that as part of my training, as part of the management of my machine learning models. And GetOps is all about that Flux integration that says, hey, AKS environment, I want you to just go and watch this particular repo. And if that declarative state of manifest in that repo is updated, I want you to take that and make it so in the AKS environment. So if someone checks in and commits a new version, for example, of a manifest about which pods they want created, all I have to do is commit it to the repo, and then Flux will see it, automatically pull it down and apply it to my Kubernetes environment. So I now have that GetOps extension for AKS in GA. Additionally, there are add-ons to AKS. So now we have the Kida add-on is in preview. So when I think about Kida, it's all about autoscale. So it's a Kubernetes event-driven autoscaler. And it can drive really any type of container scaling in my Kubernetes environment based on a whole different number of types of events. So this now gets Kida fully integrated with AKS. And we often think about Kida and Dapper and envoys for various types of communications. We now have all of these great things just there for AKS. And then the AKS Azure Disk CSI driver v2. So this is the container storage interface. And what this is doing, it gives me the ability to have persistent volumes that can then be used by pods via persistent volume claims based on Azure disks. And this V2 now gives me the ability to have a replica mount. So yes, a certain pod is using a certain Azure disk, but on other nodes, I can have a replica mount ready so that if there is a failover of the pods to a different node, it's going to be much faster to get that spun up and being used. There's also enhanced scale, enhanced performance. AKS Web Application Routing add-on is in preview. So this is all about, instead of having to deal with ingress controllers and certificates and DNS, it's just a managed ingress controller. It's NGINX behind the scenes. It's using the open service mesh for the intra-cluster communication, but it makes it super easy now to get that onboarded and running in my environment. Draft, AKS extension is in preview. So Draft is an open source project. It's all about streamline the Kubernetes development. There's actually a Draft 2 is the open source project right now. So what this is going to give me is the ability to, when I'm doing my development, I can generate the Docker file that's used to create the container image, the Kubernetes manifest to actually do the deployment based on that image, Helm charts, customize configurations, generate the GitHub actions to actually do the CI/CD as part of my DevOps pipelines. All of that is now done through this really streamlined experience. Windows Server 2022 AKS host support. If I think about Windows-based hosts in my node pool, we're used to the idea of 2019. Well, now I can have 2022 as that latest version. Azure Container Apps has gone GA. I mentioned previously the whole idea of, okay, there's AKS, then I can layer on Dapper. I can layer on Envoy for a sidecar in my pods to enable the better communication between the pods, encryption, traffic splitting, blue-green, canary, whatever that might be, CADA for the scaling. Well, they're all things I have to manage and I have to understand AKS. So the whole point of Azure Container Apps is it extracts all of that away for me. It provides a managed serverless container service. It removes the need to have that knowledge of Kubernetes and provides those Dapper, provides that CADA, provides the Envoy to make it super simple to just focus on my container-based microservice and just deploy that out. So that's now generally available. There's a new game development VM. If I think about game development, and I'm not a game developer, there's certain tooling we want. We typically want GPU-based environments for the types of interactions we're doing. And so the game development virtual machine is a new customized VM image in the Azure cloud platform. It's supported by GPU-based Azure virtual machines. And these are going to give you things like the game engines, the frameworks, the remoting protocols, drivers, SDKs, enabling me to really just get started really quick on game development. It's using Windows Server 2019 or Windows 10 as the image. And in addition to just developing on it, I could actually use this for building. I could use it for test servers. So a number of different ways I can leverage this new capability. And then there's also the Microsoft DevBox. So this is a cloud service to manage that developer workstation. It's built on Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365. I can maintain my dev image with what tools I want on there, make it easily available. I can start it. I can deploy it in a region near to my developers, but it's basically providing that complete developer experience with all of the tooling that they might need. Azure App Services. So Azure Migrate now has this enhanced app migration. This is all about the idea of taking my existing app and moving it into an app service. So now there's better facilities for bulk migrations to Azure App Service, to AKS. So it can discover and assess ASP.NET applications and give me guided content configurations to move those to Azure App Services. If I have an ASP.NET app, that's a fantastic target to just run on App Service. It can discover Java Tomcat applications, and it can help me migrate that to Azure App Service Linux or AKS. It can also containerize ASP.NET web apps and move it to Windows containers on app services or AKS. So a whole bunch of different options depending on what my application is today. App Service gRPC support. So the whole point of this Google RPC is it's this language agnostic, very high performance remote procedure call. And you can pretty much run it in any environment. So now I can use .NET with other languages coming down the line in Azure App Service to author a gRPC server. So I can have that RPC over HTTP2 with very low latency, very high performance. App Service and ACE-v3. So remember, ACE-v3 is that dedicated app service environment running in my virtual network, now has landing zones. So landing zones are all about those best practices guidance. I think about best practice for the identity, for the security, for the networking, for the automation, for the governance. So there's now a landing zone about both just the multi-tenant app service and the ACE v3 dedicated. WordPress on App Service Linux has got some enhancements. This is really about, hey, I can use Azure Blob Storage now to enhance page read writes, improve caching, image compression, VNet integration for some more secure configurations. ACE v3 migration is now available in more regions. So, hey, I'm running ACE v2 today. I want to get to the ACE v3. So this works for both internal and external load balancing configurations. And I really want to get to the ACE v3. ACE v3 does some fantastic stuff separating the customer's network communications and the communications it requires for ACE v3 to function. It separates those away. There's improvements around performance, cost, the networking model, the hardware. So now it's easier to move from an ACE v2 to an ACE v3, and they've added more regions where that migration is available. Azure Functions now has Kafka triggers. It's part of the premium plan, but now based on a Kafka message, I can trigger an Azure function, and likewise, I can have an output binding to Kafka. There's updated functions extension defaults. So if I create a new Azure Functions project, it's going to default to the latest v3 versions. A .NET app is going to get the updated versions from NuGet. It's all about, hey, just by default, I'm going to get the latest things. Durable functions now support isolated .NET worker processes. So this is preview. Ordinarily, my Azure function and the .NET it's leveraging is tied to the version of .NET I have on the host. Well, what an isolated .NET worker process does is it breaks that normal tight bond between, hey, the function and the host process. I can now actually target a particular .NET version that's maybe not even supported by the host process. So now, hey, with these durable functions that give me those stateful environments, I have that capability. Azure Functions v4 isolated can also target .NET Framework 4.8 in preview. And the durable functions can also support managed identity for connection to Azure Storage. So a whole bunch of enhancements around that. And then function dynamic concurrency. If I think about Azure Functions, there's still some compute instance that's running the invocation of the function. And there might be a certain number of concurrent invocations a certain compute instance can support. So with a dynamic concurrency, it automatically adjusts, well, what's the optimal per trigger concurrency settings based on the workload, based on the load patterns that may vary over time. That's in replacement of static concurrency, where I just say, hey, these are the throttles I want, go and enforce these. So it gives me a much better set of capabilities to maximize the resources I have, but also make sure I get the best performance. The networking side, the F5 NGINX for Azure. So this provides a whole bunch of now basically a SaaS service load balancing solution. So yes, traffic management, yes, monitoring. It can integrate with Azure Key Vault for the SSL TLS certificates. It can use JSON web tokens as part of the authentication, the authorization for users and client applications. I get native metrics in Azure. It's deployed via the marketplace. It is going to deploy into my virtual network. So I tell it a VNet I want. I tell it the subnet it's going to deploy into. It supports both a private and public IP for its front end, but it's now very easy to go and spin up an NGINX environment I want to leverage in my Azure environment. Then enhanced IPv6 multi-value traffic manager profiles. Remember, traffic manager is all based around DNS, and there's different balancing options I can pick: performance, geographical, weighted, whatever it might be. And I can embed those profiles because I can't mix them. So I might have a parent traffic manager profile that then talks to other traffic manager profiles for its distribution of the traffic. Well, when I have that nested option, I can specify, well, I need a minimum number of healthy client endpoints for those child profiles to treat it as there and send traffic to it. And before, if those endpoints were IPv4 and IPv6, it would aggregate them together. Well, now I can have separate minimum healthy child endpoint values for IPv4 and IPv6. That might be useful because, hey, maybe the performance, the capabilities of the IPv6 is higher than the 4, so I have a different number I require healthy to treat that as a viable target. So now we have that capability. Lots of database updates. So CosmosDB, Python SDK async IO. So now I can improve my Python application performance by running tasks concurrently. I don't have to run one after the other. It's asynchronous. So hey, run these, and it's going to take care of running those concurrently. Enhanced elasticity. So now the serverless increases to 1 terabyte, increased from 50 gigabytes. There's hierarchical partition keys. There's a burst capability for traffic spikes. There's a whole bunch of different things to generally just enhance the performance for my Cosmos DB. CosmosDB MongoDB API data plane RBAC. So this is saying, hey, when I'm interacting with the data via the API, rather than the control plane, the Azure Resource Manager, the data plane, I can now use role-based access control. So I can give particular roles based on the data to my various identities. That's much better than having to use some key or something else. MySQL Flexible ATV Core Business Critical tier has gone GA. So Flexible is all about the VM-based offerings of the managed databases. There's Flexible MySQL, there's Flexible Postgres. I can stop-start, there's burstable SKUs, there's automatic HA failover and more. So this new ATV core option gives me, well, up to 80 V cores and 504 gigabytes of memory. And this business critical tier is built on the ESV4 virtual machine SKUs. The MySQL Flexible does now have this business critical service tier. Obviously, I just mentioned there. So this used to be called the Flexible Server Memory Optimized. It's now business critical. And it's really just focused around those workloads that are your tier 1, they're memory optimized, and I just need bigger performance that was previously possible. Again, I still have the burstable, I still have general purpose, but this really gives me much higher capabilities. And Azure SQL Database has updates. It's now a single line of code. I could call an Azure function. I could call a REST endpoint for serverless integrations. It has better JSON support, both in terms of validating JSON and converting JSON documents for use in my database. It has a containerized Azure SQL Database instance, so I can use it for local development. So I don't have to actually have that spun up. I can have a local Azure SQL Database running in a container to test things from my local environment. Near real-time analytics, the blockchain ledger via Azure SQL Database. And there's now an Azure Synapse link for SQL. So that extraction, the movement of data from Azure SQL Database, from SQL Server 2022 into Azure Synapse Analytics, dedicated SQL pools. Hey, it's near a real-time replication. I don't have to create my own ELT, ETL, extract, transform, load pipelines. Azure Arc, remember Azure Arc is about extending the Azure control plane to other clouds, to on-premises. Stack is all about those platforms for providing certain services. Azure Stack Hub, those complete turnkey appliances. Azure Stack Edge, those boxes that get shipped to my location and bring certain Azure functionality to my edge, so it's very low latency between my other workloads. Azure Stack HCI, multiple servers running a specialized version of Windows Server with Hyper-V and Storage Spaces Direct and SDN and Windows Admin Center. So those two together work fantastically. So now Arc-enabled Kubernetes, so when I'm running Azure Arc, I can Arc-enable my Kubernetes environments that are CNCF compatible. Well, now there's a landing zone. So again, landing zone, enterprise scale best practices for that identity, security, network, governance, etc. So now that's available to help give me the best guidance. Arc-enabled SQL Managed Instance Business Critical has gone GA. So once I have my Arc-enabled Kubernetes environment, I can layer on top of that other services, data services, AI services, app services. So on the data service, one of those is SQL Managed Instance. So now we have this business critical built on SQL Server Enterprise Edition. It gives me availability groups using Kubernetes for HA by having multi-replicas using synchronous replication, unlimited CPUs, unlimited memory use. And once again, I do still have a general purpose version of that uses the standard edition if I want a single instance version of that. Single node Azure Stack HCI. So remember I said HCI was all about, hey, a cluster of local nodes that uses things like Storage Spaces Direct for hyperconverged. My storage is local to each box, but Storage Spaces Direct makes it this, hey, SMB3 volume that they can all access. Well, now I can actually have a single node. Obviously, it's not going to use Storage Spaces Direct. It actually allows me to only have one type of storage, so an NVMe or SSD, but it's just a lower barrier entry point to start using Azure Stack HCI on premises. I still get the Hyper-V, I still get the SDN, I still get those capabilities. And the key thing is I still get all those Arc-enabled workloads, AKS, Azure Virtual Desktop, I can run on this. And also Azure Key Vault Arc-enabled Kubernetes extension. So if I'm running that Kubernetes environment that is Arc-enabled, well now I can integrate with Azure Key Vault. So I have secrets in Azure Key Vault. I can expose those to the pods running in that Arc-enabled Kubernetes just as some mounted secret within the pod that it can now use. It really limits my exposure of those secrets. There is a service principal I'm using today to connect to the Azure Key Vault. I think more options will be coming down the line. For Azure AD, B2B across clouds. So what does that mean? So we always think of Azure as this commercial cloud, but remember there are sovereign clouds. There's Gov Cloud, there's China Cloud. And before, I could not B2B across them. So what they're adding in, super quickly, is if I go and look at my Azure AD now, and I look at my external identities, and I look at my cross-tenant access settings, you now have this Microsoft Cloud settings option. And what I can do from here is I could, if I want now, enable collaboration for other sovereign clouds. So that's one of the nice new capabilities I have. Rather than maybe having to duplicate my identities to multiple clouds, what I could now actually do is say, no, I'll take this account and make it a guest and give it roles in an Azure AD in a different cloud. So I now have that capability. I can then obviously use access packages as part of entitlement management, all those other features. SAML and WS Fed B2B has gone GA. So now, in addition to things like someone from a different Azure AD tenant or a Microsoft account or Gmail or one-time passcode, hey, a SAML or WS Fed connected, those B2Bs has now gone GA. I can have custom extensions for authentication. If I think about an application goes and gets a token, well, now I can have external claims with information from other sources, maybe some other LDAP. I basically create an Azure function an extension using Azure Functions or Logic Apps or really any API, and it's something that's going to get triggered by the auth flow to go and, hey, when the event of on-token issuance happens, call this thing, and it's going to give me some extra claims that I'm going to go and put into this token. So I have this. And then security defaults is rolling out to all existing tenants. So if I don't have premium, so I don't have conditional access, for example, or maybe MFA, well, security defaults is available for any tenant, and it makes all of the users, I think you have a 14-day grace period, register for MFA using something like the Microsoft Authenticator app. They can't use SMS, they can't use phone. Global admins can. They can use phone as well. It's going to turn off legacy authentication. It's going to make users do MFA for certain what are considered privileged operations. I don't have any controls to change the configurations, but it's applying these security defaults. So it's had a very successful pilot. So now it's going to roll out to all tenants. If you don't want it, I don't know why, you would be able to then disable it. But hey, this is going to roll out to all tenants. Miscellaneous, so Azure Monitor, it now has AI operations for application maps. So application maps is part of App Insights, and using the various API calls that are made from different functions, it can work out, well, what are the components that talk to each other? Well, if I'm trying to work out some root cause problem as part of an investigation, there can be a lot of noise in that picture. So what this AI Ops does, I can turn on a flat toggle and it will remove the noise. It will now just show the connections that are actually part of something I'm actually trying to investigate. Container log v2 is in preview. So hey, my AKS, my Arc-enabled Kubernetes can have container insights. As part of that, well, what this is going to do is give me a streamlined querying experience. It's going to reduce the log size. There's some cost savings there. Basically, all of the data is now in a single table. So it removes all those painful joins I had to do in the past. And because it's now a single table and I don't have to do joins, I could also use the new basic tier of log analytics. Rather than that standard analytics logs tier, I can just use that basic logs tier, which supports basic types of interactions. So it will save me money for the storage as well. JavaScript web snippet auto injection for Node.js is in preview. So again, part of App Insights. If I have my Node.js SDK version 3.1 or later, I can just enable. And so as it detects these web snippets, it's automatically going to onboard those into App Insights. And I can now manage tables from the portal for my log analytics workspace. So if quickly we just jump over again, if I super quickly jump over and look at log analytics workspace, I'll just pick one, it doesn't matter. Notice we now have this tables option. And from this tables option, it's now going to show me all the different tables I have. It gives me a view, it gives me their type, it gives me the retention. So hey, look, Azure activity we keep for 90 days. I can create, delete, edit properties. So it's just a nice little simple way to go and integrate and see data about my tables. Moving on, Azure Backup now supports write accelerator enabled disks. This is really part of the M series. It gives me sub-millisecond writes to the disks, but now I can protect those with Azure Backup. And that was it. So lots and lots of things. I had to go through it pretty quick because there was so much. But as always, I hope this was useful. Until next video, take care.